Imagine a grandmaster chess match, right? Where every single move is a literal matter of life and death. And the board is this massive, recently renovated temple complex in first century Jerusalem.
Yeah, the stakes could not be higher.
Exactly. And the players are, well, they're the most powerful political and religious figures of the day. And they are pooling all their resources to corner this one man. But before we dive into those opening moves, I want to take a brief second to welcome you to the deep dive today. And I want to offer a divine blessing for your day and for your entire week ahead. May you find clarity, peace, and purpose in whatever you're facing.
That's a beautiful way to start, and we are definitely going to need that clarity for this text because the historical situation we're looking at is just incredibly tense. I mean, it's a total powder keg.
It really is. So our mission today is to explore Luke chapter 20, and we're drawing on some really great insights from the Holman and NAA study Bibles. Basically, we want to decode this series of like rapid-fire verbal traps that are set for Jesus by the religious establishment.
Right, it's attack after attack.
Yeah. We want to understand the mechanics behind these traps and, the profound underlying meaning of how he just completely dismantles them.
Well, to really appreciate the brilliance of what's happening here, you have to understand the immediate context. Like, we are picking up the story right after a massive disruption.
Oh, the temple clearing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jesus has just physically cleared the temple courts of merchants. He turned over the tables of the money changers. I mean, he basically shut down the economic engine of the entire religious establishment.
During their busiest season, no less.
Exactly, during Passover. So naturally, this brings the authorities storming right up to him. The text actually says the chief priests, scribes, and elders approach him.
Now, historically speaking, this isn't just, a random group of angry clerics, right? This is an official delegation.
Far from it. That specific triad of titles, so the priests, the scribes, and the elders, that means this is a delegation from the Sanhedrin.
Oh.
Yeah, that is the supreme governing council of the Jewish people. They are the absolute authority in that space. And their demand to Jesus is super pointed. They say, tell us by what authority you're doing these things. Who gave you this authority?
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because on the surface, that sounds like a perfectly reasonable administrative question.
Sounds formal.
Yeah, it reminds me of like modern middle management desperately demanding to see an employee's credentials or, a city inspector asking for a zoning permit. But I have to push back a bit on the dynamic here.
Okay, go ahead.
Why doesn't Jesus just give them a straight answer? Like, if he is who he says he is, why not just declare, I have divine authority and, settle the debate right there?
Because a direct answer is the trap itself. You have to remember the environment.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's Passover. There are hundreds of thousands of pilgrims in Jerusalem.
Right.
And the Roman military is stationed right next door in the Antonia fortress. They are literally looking down into the temple courts, just watching for any sign of a Jewish uprising.
Oh, wow. So they're physically looming over them?
Exactly. So if Jesus openly declares divine authority in that incredibly volatile moment, the Sanhedrin will immediately arrest him for blasphemy.
I see. But if he says his authority is just his own human initiative, the crowds will turn on him, right? Because they currently believe he's a prophet.
Yes, you've got it. What's fascinating here is how they've constructed this scenario where either answer leads to his destruction.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus counters with a question of his own. He says, I will also ask you a question. Tell me, John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin?
That is such a brilliant pivot. I mean, he just links his authority right back to John the Baptist.
He does.
And the study Bibles point out that this throws the Sanhedrin into an absolute panic. Like, they literally have to step aside and whisper among themselves to figure out a response.
The historical context shows exactly why they were so terrified. If they answer that John's authority was from heaven, well, Jesus has them.
Right.
He will just ask, then why didn't you believe him? Because John explicitly pointed to Jesus as the Messiah.
Got it. And if they say John's baptism was just, of human origin, they face an immediate physical threat from the crowd. I think the text says they were afraid the people would stone them.
Yes, literally stone them to death.
Which really shows you just how fiercely protective the general public was of John the Baptist's legacy. He was like a total populist hero.
He was. And the Sanhedrin, these supreme, educated, supposedly fearless leaders, they look at the angry crowd, they look at Jesus, and they just take the coward's way out.
Yeah.
And say, we don't know where it was from.
We don't know. Wow. The ultimate political non-answer.
Exactly.
They forfeit the debate because basically preserving their own status and physical safety is way more important to them than identifying the truth.
And Jesus uses their own intellectual dishonesty right against them.
Hmm.
Since they refuse to answer him honestly, he refuses to answer their original question. He exposes that they aren't actually looking for theological truth at all.
No, not at all.
They're just conducting an interrogation to maintain their own power.
And because they stonewalled him, the whole dynamic shifts. Like, Jesus doesn't just let the conversation end there. He actually goes on the offensive. He looks right at these leaders and tells this highly charged story right to their faces, the parable of the wicked tenants.
Yeah, and this parable draws a direct line back to the Old Testament, specifically the prophet Isaiah, chapter 5. Jesus describes a man who plants a vineyard, leases it out to tenant farmers, and then travels far away.
Okay.
Now, to a first-century audience, the vineyard was a universally understood symbol for the nation of Israel, and the absentee owner represented God.
So harvest time rolls around, right? And the owner sends a servant to collect his share of the grapes, but the tenants just beat the servant and throw him out.
Right.
And the owner tries again. He sends another servant. They beat him. He sends a third. They wound him.
Those successive servants symbolize the Old Testament prophets. Throughout Israel's history, God sent prophets to call the national leaders back to faithfulness. And historically, as the text shows, those prophets were routinely rejected, persecuted, and murdered by the religious establishment.
It's a brutal track record. And then we get to the climax of the story. The owner decides to send his beloved son, assuming the tenants will respect his heir. But the tenants see the son coming and they say, "This is the heir, let's kill him and the inheritance will be ours."
Yeah.
I have always been fascinated by the sheer absurdity of the tenants' logic here. I mean, it's essentially a violent real estate heist, but why would they possibly think murdering the son would make them the legal owners? That makes no sense.
Well, it actually taps into an obscure reality of ancient property law.
Oh, really?
Yeah. If an absentee landlord died without an heir, the land could be considered ownerless. And the first people to claim it, like, the tenants already working it, could seize legal possession. So they actually think they can force a legal loophole through murder.
Oh, wow. Okay, that makes perfect sense of the story. And it really highlights the staggering arrogance of these religious leaders. I mean, they are essentially trying to seize God's kingdom, squat on it, and control it on their own terms, completely without answering to the true owner.
Exactly. And by referring to the beloved son, Jesus is clearly talking about himself. He's prophesying his own imminent murder at their hands.
Wow.
And he finishes the story by stating that the owner will return, destroy those tenants, and give the vineyard to others.
And the study notes I read actually connect that specific warning to the year 70 AD, right?
Yeah.
When the Romans completely destroyed Jerusalem and the temple.
Yes, that's exactly the connection the scholars make.
Jesus is saying this rejection will have catastrophic consequences for the nation. And then he quotes Psalm 118 about the stone the builders rejected becoming the cornerstone.
The foundational piece of a new structure. Jesus is telling the Sanhedrin, you are the builders of Israel, and you are tossing me aside. But God is going to use me as the foundation of an entirely new people.
And the leaders realize he's talking about them, of course, and they want to arrest him right then and there. But again, the crowd is watching. So because theological intimidation failed, the establishment realizes they need state power. They need him to break Roman law so the empire will basically do their dirty work for them.
That brings us right to the next faction. They send in undercover spies who pretend to be, sincere seekers of truth.
Well, of course.
And they present a problem that's specifically designed to get Jesus executed by the state. They ask him, is it lawful for us to pay taxes to Caesar or not?
See, this is classic gotcha journalism. It's the ultimate trap. And the context makes it so vicious, right? Because this wasn't just a generic income tax. This was the Roman poll tax.
Yes, a denarius a year,
Yeah.
simply for the privilege of existing as a subject of the Roman Empire.
Ugh.
It was a deeply humiliating, constant reminder of their subjugation. The Jewish people absolutely despised it.
So it's an impossible bind. I mean, if Jesus says, yes, pay the tax, he is instantly branded a Roman sympathizer and a traitor to his own people. The crowds will just abandon him.
Right.
But if he says, no, do not pay, those spies will sprint right to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and report Jesus for inciting a tax revolt and treason. And Rome crucified people for that.
Absolutely. But Jesus sees right through the setup. He asks them to produce a denarius. He asks whose image and inscription are on this,
Right.
and they answer Caesar's. specifically would have been the Emperor Tiberius.
And Jesus replies with that, famous line, then give back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's. Now, that is a brilliant tactical evasion, but it feels like there is a much deeper philosophical line being drawn here about, like, our civic duty versus our spiritual duty. Am I reading too much into that?
No, you're not reading too much into it at all.
Yeah.
When we connect this to the bigger picture, that is exactly the theological core of his answer. He is acknowledging that human government does have a legitimate role. The coin was minted by Caesar. It has his face stamped on it. You participate in his economy, so yeah, pay the tax. But the second half of his statement is where the real weight lies.
Right, because if the coin belongs to Caesar because it bears Caesar's image, then, well, what bears God's image?
Human beings. According to the opening pages of Genesis, you and I are created in the imago Dei, the image of God.
Wow.
So Jesus is making this incredibly radical claim. He is saying, sure, you owe a piece of metal to the state because it bears the emperor's face, but you owe your entire existence, your ultimate loyalty, and your very soul to God because you bear God's face.
Caesar gets the medal, God gets the person.
Exactly.
That is amazing. And it completely silences the spies. They just marvel at it and walk away. But of course, the opposition doesn't quit. With the political assassin sideline, a totally different intellectual faction steps into the ring with a philosophical puzzle.
Enter the Sadducees. And the historical context here is crucial. The Sadducees were the wealthy aristocratic elite. They were heavily involved in the priesthood. Theologically, they were strict traditionalists. They only accepted the Torah, so the first 5 books of Moses, as binding scripture. They rejected the later prophets, and most importantly for this trap, they completely denied any concept of an afterlife, angels, or resurrection.
Right, and here's where it gets really interesting. If you have ever spent, 5 minutes in a modern online comment section, you will recognize the Sadducees' tactic immediately.
Oh, yeah.
Because they don't believe in the resurrection, they aren't actually asking a genuine question. They construct this bizarre, bad faith straw man argument designed specifically to just make the whole concept of an afterlife look utterly ridiculous.
That's exactly what they're doing. They base their puzzle on an ancient law known as levirate marriage, which is found in Deuteronomy 25.
Right.
In the ancient Near East, a widow without children was in dire economic peril. She had no husband to provide for her and no heir to inherit her late husband's land. So the law mandated that the deceased man's brother should marry the widow to provide an heir and protect her social standing.
So the Sadducees take this, social safety net, and they just stretch it to an absurd hypothetical. A woman marries the first brother, he dies childless. She marries the second, he dies. The third, the fourth, all the way through 7 brothers.
Right.
No kids, all dead. Finally, the woman dies. And they ask this incredibly smug question. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be, since all 7 were married to her?
They assume they've trapped him in a logical paradox. Their underlying assumption is that if there is a resurrection, it must just be a continuation of mortal earthly life, complete with property laws and marriage contracts.
But Jesus just dismantles the premise of their question entirely. He starts by explaining that marriage is an institution for this age, like a biological and social necessity to sustain human society, basically because people die.
Yes. But in the resurrection, the paradigm shifts completely.
Yeah.
Jesus says that those who are resurrected can no longer die. They are immortal, like angels.
Right.
Therefore, the institutions designed to propagate and protect mortal life, like marriage and reproduction, are just no longer necessary.
So he corrects their theology of the afterlife, but then he takes it a step further. And this is the part I love. It's like a lawyer winning a Supreme Court case using only opposing counsel's favorite precedent.
Exactly.
Because he knows the Sadducees only respect the first 5 books of Moses. So he doesn't quote Daniel or Isaiah to prove the resurrection. He goes straight to the book of Exodus, the story of the burning bush.
It is a phenomenal piece of exegesis. He points out that at the burning bush, God identifies himself to Moses by saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob.
Not, I was their God. I am their God, present tense.
Yes. The logic is impenetrable. God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. If God is still in an active covenant relationship with Abraham centuries after Abraham physically died, then Abraham must still be alive in some form.
Wow.
The relationship did not terminate at the grave.
It's such a brilliant deduction that even some of the scribes, who usually hate Jesus, but who happen to, believe in the resurrection, they can't help themselves. They actually speak up and say, well said, teacher.
Yeah, they have to hand it to him.
They were forced to concede his brilliance, and at that point, the text notes that nobody dared to ask him any more questions. Like, the attackers are officially out of ammunition. Nobody wants to step up to the microphone.
Because every time they try to trap him, he just exposes their ignorance. And now, Jesus takes control of the dialogue. He proposes a riddle of his own from Psalm 110.
Okay.
He says, "How is it that they say the Messiah is the son of David?" David himself declares in the book of Psalms, "The Lord said to my Lord, 'Sit at my right hand.'" David calls him Lord. How then can he be his son?
Now, admittedly, this sounds a bit like ancient genealogy math, which can be pretty tough to follow for us today. How exactly does David calling someone Lord prove a theological point about the Messiah?
Well, in that patriarchal culture, a father or a great-grandfather is always superior to his descendants.
Right.
An ancestor would never call his great-great-grandson my Lord. The Jewish expectation at the time was that the Messiah would simply be a great human military leader from David's bloodline. But Jesus is using David's own prophetic words to argue that the Messiah is far more than just a human descendant.
Ah, I see. Okay. If King David himself is referring to this future descendant as his Lord, it means the descendant is inherently superior to David.
Yes.
It points to a dual nature. The Messiah is both a human descendant of David and a divine figure far above him. He is really stretching their theological imagination here.
He is. And having dismantled their traps and, established his own authority, Jesus turns to his disciples, but he speaks loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear, and he delivers a severe warning about the scribes who have been harassing him all day.
Yeah, he draws a devastating contrast between their public persona and their private actions. He tells the crowd to beware of them because they love walking around in flowing robes, they demand the most prestigious seats in the synagogues, and they want everyone to greet them with profound respect in the marketplace.
Right, they have carefully cultivated this image of elite holiness. But then Jesus pulls back the curtain on how they actually operate when no one is looking.
He says they devour widows' houses and for a show make lengthy prayers. Now, when I hear that, I immediately think of modern affinity fraud.
Oh, interesting.
Scammers who use a veneer of respectability, maybe even hiding behind religious language, to gain the trust of vulnerable people just to drain their bank accounts. Is that what was happening in first century Jerusalem?
That is a very accurate comparison, actually. The socioeconomic reality of the first century was brutal for women who lacked a male advocate. Widows had very limited legal rights and struggled to manage property. So these scribes and religious leaders would step in to act as legal fiduciaries or estate executors.
Okay, so they were supposed to be protecting the widow's assets.
Yes. But instead, they were embezzling the funds. They were mismanaging the estates and legally stealing the property of defenseless women, all while masking their corruption behind long, highly visible public prayers.
Us.
It is the ultimate betrayal of trust.
It's just nauseating. Using the trappings of faith to exploit the very people God specifically commands society to protect. And Jesus issues a final verdict on them, stating these men will be punished most severely.
It is a heavy, sobering conclusion to a very intense day. Over the course of this single chapter, Jesus has systematically stripped away every layer of the establishment's defense.
Which really brings us to the core of what this deep dive has uncovered today. So what does this all mean? If we zoom out and look at the entirety of Luke 20, we have watched a masterclass in maintaining integrity under pressure.
Absolutely.
Jesus bypassed the authority trap regarding John the Baptist. He exposed the leader's violent rebellion in the parable of the wicked tenants. He navigated an impossible political dilemma with a Roman coin. And he dissolved a cynical philosophical riddle about the resurrection.
And beneath all those intellectual victories, he consistently exposed the underlying hypocrisy of leaders who cared more about preserving their wealth, their status, and their public image than they cared about actual truth or compassion.
It leaves us with some really provocative questions to ask ourselves because, let's be honest, we live in a culture saturated with online debates, bad faith arguments, and constant attempts to trap people in their words.
Right.
When we engage in those spaces, are we genuinely seeking truth? Or are we just trying to win an argument and protect our own status, like the Sanhedrin?
That is a very challenging mirror to hold up. And I would add one more thought for you to carry with you this week. Think back to that Roman denarius.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus essentially said the coin belonged to Caesar because it was stamped with Caesar's image. But you are stamped with the image of God. If the coin goes back to the one whose image it bears, what does it actually mean for your daily life, your decisions, and your relationships to recognize that your very existence belongs to God?
Wow. That is a profound realization. The image of Caesar versus the image of God. It completely reframes how we view our own value and our responsibilities. Well, that wraps up our journey through the traps and triumphs of Luke chapter 20. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive and for exploring these ancient texts with us. God blesses all the listeners. See you next time.